Hey, it's Ken with World Love Week, and boy, are you in for a treat. Coming up next is one of my favorite speakers, so I want you to fasten your seatbelts, stay tuned, and get ready to rock and roll for another amazing segment. But think about this for just 1 minute. How many amazing segments have you missed so far? You know, we have a full week of content for you. Scores of speakers, incredible amounts of content, great love to share. And I want you to have every single bit of it. And the reality is that unless you access the recordings later on, you're going to miss a ton. Because I don't know about you, but I surely can't stay awake for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So here's what I recommend. Go to the dashboard, worldloveweek.com/dashboard, and grab yourself the VIP option. Get it right now while you can at the best price ever. You'll thank yourself. Our next guest is I'm going to say he's now a friend of mine because I just feel so close to him. He's so smart. I like being close to people that are smart. It beats the crap out of the alternative. Because when you're around people that's smart, you tend to skew better. You tend to skew smarter. So I want you all to hang around people that are smart or smarter than you, because then it elevates you. We want to play a bigger game. I think it's really super important. When we were doing Justin's preview session just the other day, in popped through one of the chats our next guest, and we have it on tape. We have it on record on whatever digital. Justin just exploding. Oh my gosh, it's Simon! It was precious. It was absolutely precious, and you'll get to see that. We'll have it posted in the members area there. So let me introduce you to Professor Simon Bowen. And whether he's a true professor in university, I don't really care. I have elevated you, young man, to professor status. So let's give him a big hand. Welcome to Opportunity Fund.
Thank you. And so you can hear me okay? Everything's good? Text working?
No, you sound excellent. You sound great.
Perfect.
You look great. I have a message for you. Call your attorney or call my attorney.
Yeah, I saw that. I do. I need to reach out. It's been going since 4 o'clock this morning here in Perth. And as you know, in Australia, we also celebrate Anzac Day today, where we acknowledge all our returned servicemen and women since the World Wars. And so it's been a busy morning, but I've been sitting in front of Opportunity Thon. Aww. And what a fabulous morning you have. And how good is Les Brown?
Oh, my God. It's been awesome. It's been so great. It's been so great. People ask me, how am I going to be able to stay awake for 27 hours? I'm like, look at the guests. I mean, it's just look at the guests.
Absolutely. It's been fantastic.
Yeah. So thank you. I appreciate, and coming from that means a lot. I appreciate that very much. You have inspired me, and I know there's supposed to be some questions I'm supposed to ask you, but we'll just. If there's a question I'm supposed to ask you, just ask it. Sure. You inspire me because what you bring to the table for someone like me that's a type A, that doesn't have a giant amount of that. People are sending me messages, and I'm like, I'm on the air. What are you doing, people? Like, get a grip. I'm going to stop talking to Simon Bowen to give you an answer. Please, come on, people. For those of us that are entrepreneurially oriented and have that, we're everywhere, bright shiny object syndrome.
Sure.
You're able to put things into systems and into processes and as Justin said, into triangles. Yes. That methodologies is the word, the big M word, that allow them to create massive amounts of profit in an easier amount of time in a better way. Am I describing that the right way?
Absolutely. It's a good way of thinking. People talk a lot about systems in business, and a business is it's both magical and mechanical. And, the mechanics of a business are the systems and processes and things like that. But the magic of a business is always human. And the magic of a business is the idea that we base the business on and the quality of the thinking of the people leading the business. So a business is only as good as the idea on which it's built. From Michael Gerber, and then the ability to share those ideas with people in such a powerful way that you influence them to make choices in your favor, vendors, customers, staff, banks, regulators. And so the two most important systems in a business for magic is the system for thinking and the system for influence. And I've devised a way over 25 years of working with, some of the largest companies of using, squares, triangles, circles, and lines in visual models. We call it the models method, to systemize the way we think first and then express that big idea to people so that they can just lock onto it in no time. And so what shifts is, instead of people hearing your idea, they see your idea before it becomes a practical thing that they've got to hold on to. And if people can see your idea, it's easier to buy it. There's fewer gaps, there's fewer grey, there's fewer vagueness and things like that. So, if business is magic and mechanics, your delivery processes and all of those sorts of systems is one aspect, and that needs to be smooth and flow. If the mechanics aren't clean, it doesn't allow people to focus on the magic. But then the magic which people create must be clean as well. And we do that through these models that systemize thinking and influence. And I'll give some examples of those in a minute, but that's really what we do. We found a way. Ryan Dice from Digital Marketer, said, I got off stage speaking at one of their events, and he said, you've just created a whole new vocabulary for business. And I really think that that's absolutely true. And right now in these times, it's really important for people to be able to communicate and express their ideas really crisply, really cleanly, and without any extraneous noise that you create just through your own fluff, if you like. And so absolutely, circles, triangles, squares, and straight lines, they're the most powerful communication tools on the planet.
Yeah. Well, for those that are visual, if you think about just the modalities with which we communicate, when you play in that visual arena, you capture your communication so much easier. Just words are things like 7% of the communication.
Absolutely.
So you cover so much of that, which is really critical.
Yeah.
But I think primarily your model, and correct me if I'm wrong, you spend more energy on the sales process. Is that?
Yes. So I've spent a quarter of a century working in the corporate environment and with entrepreneurs, but I facilitate typically really large public projects or large company strategy sessions. I did all the stakeholder engagement for a $1.4 billion sports stadium that was built here. I do export plans for whole industries and things like that. And so a lot of my energy is spent in the strategy and sales end of the business, bringing the revenue in. But we apply models to project management, to performance management. I have a 3-minute model that the leader of a team needs to understand. It's just 3 circles. And if you understand that model, every performance conversation with a team member is 3 to 5 minutes. And that's it. And people are crystal clear about where it's headed and what we need to do right now. Because so much is said without being said. And actually, if I can share my screen, and let's give that a go and see what happens.
Yeah, do the screen shares. I knew you wanted to do something with that today.
And let's see.
Tested that the other day. So I know.
Yeah, let's see if this works like it did the other day.
That was so cool. That was the coolest thing when we did that. I got it. There we go.
Has anything happened now? There we are.
We got it.
Perfect.
I love technology that works.
Yes. So for a start, what I'm about to draw is a model, right? But it's a model that explains models. And so I'm just going to do 2. And then what I really want to give people before we leave here is just a triangle that will allow them to maybe address business and selling to clients and things like that in ways that they are perhaps not, but also understand a different way of communicating. My screen is just flipped back to just me. Do you still have the...
There we go.
Yeah.
I think Dean took it away.
I've got a backup. So if the iPad goes off your screen, I have a backup. We can fix it. So.
And I think we wanted to see your smiling face since you weren't writing it.
So let's look at a model that explains models, or in fact, 2 models that explain models. So when there's something that needs to be communicated to people, we often just resort to words only. And we do that in, copy, text on paper, or we just speak to words only. And when we do that, it's like a red zone. So what happens is people say, oh, I hear you. Just let me get my iPad working. I hear you. And really that translates into it's just noise. And boy, there's a lot of noise around. And the other reality is that only 11%, so whilst people talked about the modalities, visual, or kinesthetic, only 11% of the information from the world around us comes in through the ears. You know, there's approximately 3 to 5% through taste and smell, and about 3% through touch and that sort of thing, but only 11% through the ears. And so if we can increase someone's visual access to an idea, if we can bring it in through the eyes, and the visual channel is 83%, 83% of the world's information comes to us through the eyes. So an animal, primal instinct, flight and fight, will hear a noise, but they don't run. They only run when they see the threat. They don't react to the auditory, they react to the visual. And the eyes are so much more emotional than the ears. We hear a news story read out in the news, and then we see the images and everything changes. And so if we can give people visual access to an idea, they say, oh, I see. And when people say, I see, now they say, well, that's interesting. So we've shifted from this is just noise to this is interesting. Mm. If then we can give people, and interestingly enough, we could do this with stock images and things like that, photos. But if we can give people visual, structural access as well, which is what a model is doing, is giving you a structure for the thinking. If we can give you structural access, we shift over to this other side where people say, oh, I get it. And that's believable because it has a structure, and the structure looks kind of scientific and organized, so it's believable. So that means if we can move people up to this quadrant really rapidly, where they say, I see, I get it, now this is desirable because it's interesting and it's believable. But there's a super green quadrant. If this was a scale from 1 to 10 on each of these two sides, if we deliver this information, and I call that choreography, which is what I'm doing right now with you, there's a very specific way I'm walking through this model. Yeah. If we deliver this with great choreography, we hit this thing called the super green zone. And at this level, desirable becomes instantly buyable. And it, in a heartbeat, everything's changed. And the easiest way for people to understand this is just think about how long it would have taken to explain what I just did in words only. It would be impossible. I would have lost you at noise.
Yeah. And what you've done with the colors and so on, I mean, I'm looking, it's like, it's beautiful. For a visual like me, this is wonderful. I mean, I'm like, I don't even know what the hell it says, but it just looks so nice. You got me. You know?
Well, I wanted to, a part of my agenda was to turn communication into art. And if you can turn communication into art, people will engage with you. But the truth is, people often say, oh, some people are visual, everyone's visual first because most of it goes in through the eyes.
Yeah, that's fair.
And then we do something with it inside our head, which is visual, auditory, or kinesthetic. But 83% of all the information gets in through the eyes. And so most of us are visual first. And there's another key model in play that will help people understand why this is just so powerful. And I have CEOs now around the world that I work with who, we've made models the central thinking system for the business. All of their conversations in their management teams are done through models. This emerged for me when I would get engaged by the government. And they'd say, we're going to put a couple of hundred people in the room who are at war over an issue with each other. And they're all at war with us over our policy on it. Right? And you've got 2 hours to get them to agree. And I go,
Oh my
okay.
God.
And that was my bread and butter for 20 years. And we always got them to agreement. But the strategy was simple. If you've got 2 hours with people, if you frustrate them for 3/4 of the time, you build enough energy in that frustration. There must be tension for people to take action.
Yes.
If there's no tension, there's no action. And so if you frustrate them for 3/4 of the time, and then a half an hour before the end of the scheduled meeting, I move to the whiteboard and I say, I think I can draw this. Just that line, I think I can draw this, is magical. When you draw people in. And where you point someone's gaze, you point their attention. And so the moment I go to a whiteboard and say, I think I can draw this, and I go to the whiteboard, all attention is on the whiteboard, and something interesting happens. Instead of it being people communicate, backwards and forwards with each other, which is really when people are communicating verbally, it's compete or retreat. Even if there's no conflict, it's compete or retreat. Yeah. And so what we often do is put a third person in the mix, who's meant to be the facilitator. In that case, it was me. We're going to put you in the room with people that are in compete or retreat, and your job is to bring them to agreement, right? And so typically a facilitator will say, well, what do you think? Ask. And they'd tell. Well, here's what I think. Okay, here's what they're saying. Share. What do you think? Ask. And they'd tell. And so facilitators are really just interpreters. But what it does do is it elevates the quality, the value of the conversation. Well, I figured, I worked out that I could take myself out of that, and I could replace myself with powerful visual models. And my flagship model is a thing called the Genius model, but powerful visual models that allow the person to say, oh, okay, here's what I think this would be called. And it allows this person to go, oh, right, I agree, and that's interesting. What about this? And this person can say, okay, I'm not so sure that I agree with that, but how about this? And they reach agreement on the chunks of the models, and bit by bit, the whole model builds. And we get to the end and everybody would say to me, why didn't you just draw that at the start? And I would say, well, I didn't know what it was going to be at the start. We just built that together, and people can't disagree with something they've built together. But the real shift that has occurred is that this compete or retreat paradigm has disappeared. And now it's just side by side working on the model, and the dynamic changes entirely. And it's just such a powerful process for communication. So, because what's really happening, and we've probably got about 10 minutes, and I really want to leave that triangle with people at the end that will help them right now with selling in this environment, both leaders in their businesses selling to their teams, and businesses selling to customers who are still able and are in the market to buy. But what's really going on is, if this is an intensity scale, and then this is time and effort. And so from high to low intensity, whenever we put a new idea in front of somebody, a new thought, a new principle, something we're trying to influence them towards. Now, that could be your product or service. It could be you as a leader in your business saying, here's what we have to do right now during this pandemic. Whenever we put a new idea in front of people, we are hardwired for resistance. In other words, we have an automatic inbuilt system to say no. And the evidence of that is, you go into a shop, buy your own choice, and the shopkeeper says, may I help you? And you say, no, thanks, just looking. Yet you went in there and they've offered help. And so we have this high intensity of resistance. And then, so on the other side of that, though, we have a low intensity for acceptance. We're not hardwired for acceptance. So someone says, Ken, you're doing an awesome job with Opportunity-thon, and your energy is fantastic, and this is, and you'll probably go, You know, it's nothing. We all have to do something. We're not good at acceptance, right? So we've got an automatic system for no, and we don't have an automatic system for yes. And so for the most part, selling to people or influencing people is really the process of getting to this point where the curves flip, this point of inflection, which we call conversion. Conversion is nothing more than the resistance and acceptance curves flipping over. And so in a sales scenario, this is called sales. And in order to make it happen faster or easier, we will often apply pressure. Pressure-based selling. And all pressure does is push the curves out even further. So what we discovered, or what I discovered as I did this work, was if I placed a model in front of people, we almost went straight to the point of inflection where the curves would start to flip. And we could pop out the other side, and instead of selling, we could be facilitating. And if you replace selling with facilitating, everything changes. And just putting a model into the conversation takes you almost immediately to that point of inflection. So there's kind of 2 or 3 models there that give the background of the science behind this thing. It's incredibly powerful. So what we do is we create a whole lot of models for people. And one of the the gift that I have given you, it's going to go into the VIP pack. Is that right? I think.
Yes.
It's a great little tool. It's using the bell curve, and there's a video there that shows people exactly how to use it and the choreography, how to walk through it. And it's got a little 7-point checklist so people can customize it to their product or service. But it's using the bell curve to eliminate price as an issue, which is just super powerful in selling. Okay. And you do it at the start of the conversation, not at the end. The time to address price is before you start talking about product. I'm not talking about giving them the price. I'm talking about setting a context for price. And what the bell curve will do, done well, will cause the customer to make a decision at the start of the conversation that they're not interested in cheap and nasty, and they're probably not even interested in average, which really just leaves you and anyone else who's a competitor at the top end of the market as an option for them. But they've articulated that to you before you even get into the selling part of the conversation, and it's so gentle and easy. It's not funny. So it's just a quick model that people can use. So what we do is we take all of this thinking and we articulate that into models that just shift everything about how we communicate. And I'm happy to take a couple of questions, Ken, and then I'll leave people with this really simple little triangle that would just change the paradigm for how people think about what they're selling right now in the conversations they're having. But I'm happy to handle any questions or anything like that for a few minutes because I've talked a lot.
You're doing awesome. Like Tracy says, you're my new favorite so far. So Ken says, as pictures worth 1,000 words, simply the process. Or simplify the process rather. So we have a 30-second or so delay for when you ask that. So let's see. I also use similar drawings to Simon when explaining my program. Really clarifies and simplifies it. And removes resistance. Let's see. But I'm not seeing any questions. We got a few comments, but no questions yet. Sure. But we'll see what pops in. The beauty is Simon, that when you have something like that, it just makes it so much easier to understand. And the engagement of the drawing part, it's sort of like as a speaker, when I say, let me tell you a story, everyone just settles in and it's all nice, and those magic words, let me tell you a story, let me draw you a picture, is the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely is.
It's the same thing. Raquel, the question.
Well, actually, I don't have a question. I just wanted to bridge because Casey was talking about communicate with people how they want to be communicated. He was in a room speaking to basically people who looked like they all had grandchildren, and they said they'd call their grandchildren and they wouldn't answer. Then he told them to take out their phones and send a text, and it's actually what you're talking about is communicating with people with how they want to be communicated with, not actually just like social media or things of that sort. You're actually talking that, hey, when you're speaking to them, use the ways that we communicate, which is visual, which is words, and then actually bridging the gap to the mind on how their minds work. And that's like bringing it all together, because it's actually truly like an art of communication, which is what we've been talking about since we started between all of the speakers.
Yeah. Well, the brain is the meaning-making machine. And the brain, despite how people think they receive information, the brain works in imagery. We call it imagination. The brain doesn't imagine a story in a stream of words running through the brain. If I said to people, you know, think about what your school was like when you were in primary school, no one will have a stream of words running through their heads. They'll get a picture, an image, imagination. And so when we start really actually communicating with people in a much more powerful visual way, but with structure, what we do is we fire up their imagination. And when people are curious, they're more receptive. And when people can imagine themselves into the model, and they buy the model, they bought you and they bought the idea. It also means they don't have to disagree with your opinion, because they're not hearing your opinion. They're looking at a model. So it takes out the compete and retreat. And the other thing that it does, you know, when you talk about platforms and Facebook and things like that, it almost eliminates the meaning of the platform, because you've brought the conversation back to what we all understand, which is the most basic form of communication we ever had, and it started with cave art. And the first things that children create in a really deliberate communication sense is drawings, and they're circles and lines that you can't make sense of, and they go, that's mummy and that's daddy. And even though the drawing might not be that great, everyone goes, oh, that's so special, you're so wonderful, look at that, and they frame it. And the children feel fantastic because of this. And so when we do this, when we're using this, we're going back to a really deeply rooted sense of reward and comfort and feeling, and our most basic form of communication, which wasn't originally words. It started with cave art. You know, we've got, you know, the Indigenous people in Australia are 40 or 60,000 years old, depending on which body of research. And some of our cave art is extraordinary. And, you know, to me, these models are like the business world's modern version of cave art, if you like, that you know, just carries a story. And Ken, I'm like you, I'm a big believer in stories and open loops.
Yep.
And models allow you to tell a story inside a framework, and it allows you to leave really big open loops. So if I had drawn that 2x2 matrix, and then had said, if I had drawn that 2x2 matrix, but then had said to people, look, I don't have time to cover the top one. Yeah. We'll have to leave that.
Oh.
No one would let me leave until I'd filled that in.
That's right. God forbid you leave something incomplete.
It's a classic open loop, right? So it just allows you to, as soon as you start drawing, you own the conversation. Yeah. And it's just super powerful.
But it wasn't like as soon as you started drawing, you actually, every time that you put your, you know, you started drawing, you actually explained each step of the process.
Yeah.
It's not just this picture, you built it across with the words. Correct. And the visual all at the same time. Like if somebody actually put this picture up in its final form, what would happen is it would be then confusing, because you'd be saying, I'm talking about, I hear noise, and they'd be looking over at desirable. So because you grew the process to explain how people think, that actually also gave them that form of clarity. So it's also how you're introducing the information.
It's we call that choreography, Raquel. I've studied stage magic and comedy, and we used the setup, which is the setup of the joke or the setup of the magic trick, and then within a model we always have a punchline or a reveal, just as you do in comedy and stage magic. And so the punchline or the reveal in this model was, but there's another zone. We call it the super green zone. Now everyone's going, what's the super green zone? How do I get there? And well, you get to the super green zone if I show you how to build a model, and then more particularly deliver great choreography. So it's just a really You're right, Raquel. It's about the process, and it really changes the way people communicate.